This is Gaby Staten Island on the Craft Growers Network, and I'm joined, as usual or as often, by my good friend Notso Dog, and also John from Nature's Jar is joining us. He's going to tell his story today, and he's also going to tell the story about this incredible gift he gave me of these seeds from a female breeder that started in the 80s. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, I want to welcome John and, of course, Notso Dog. And yeah, I'm super excited about today's show. Today's show has been, I'd say, almost a year in the making because John gave me these seeds almost a year ago. And yeah, I'm just getting to it. And I wanted to bring him on so that he could tell his story and tell this amazing story about this breeder. So, John, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we get started too much on the story about the seeds, I want you to tell us a little bit about your story. So let us know
Okay.
how you got introduced to cannabis, and give us a little bit about your story. We're gonna make people wait a couple minutes to hear about the seeds.
All right. My story. You want my weed story? Okay.
Your weed story. That's right. That's what we do here.
My weed story is probably like a lot of smoker stories. Um, I got curious. I was always like one of those kids that was running around with the older folks, and I grew up around my dad's friends, so I had like the uncles around. I was curious about all the things that they were doing. And so I got playing with weed like when I was 13 or 14. The first time I smoked weed, I tried smoking weed, and my mom found it one time before I could even smoke it. My buddy gave it to me. She was real up my ass when I was a kid. But
Where'd you live?
I was born in Fresno and grew up in North County, San Diego, and in Carlsbad. So, which at the time was a cool place because it wasn't as developed now, which is, I guess, California's whole story. But so, smoking with a friend in junior high, out of a can, probably like a Pepsi can or something. I don't know. Got a little buzz, felt cool, and then just kind of like on and off. Played with weed. I was involved in sports real heavy, um, so I kind of, it wasn't like a something I did all the time. It was like for fun, and then as high school was ending for me, it was when I got into weed more seriously. Let me think. When I was like 19, I had a friend who had a plant in his closet, and we were all getting into smoking regularly. And I'll never forget. We're in his apartment. He opens the door, and it was just like, ah, blowing lights and this fluorescent green plant, and it was like vining up the sides of the walls. And I just was like, oh my God, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. That is gorgeous. And so I immediately started popping the seeds that I had collected from the good weed that I had saved, and they shortly all got found by my mom and other people walking behind our houses. And so that kind of slowed me down, but I was into weed. Like I found that weed was helping me think clearly and regulate my emotions. And at first it was a fun thing, but after a while it was like, God, I just feel so much better smoking pot. And I was experimenting and learning myself. So I was 21, I started hanging out more with my friend that was growing and helping him. And then I went and bought a light and started popping stuff inside. Started with like a fluorescent light, went to a grow light. One light turned to two lights. And then I had kind of a big change happen. My little sister It's kind of funny. She's 18 and started working at a weed dispensary. So I met her boss and became friends with him, and he was like putting in good work. This guy had like several clubs. He was renting this entire like small industrial complex, and he had like the dispenser was in the front. There was 2 grows in the back. He was storing his VW bus collection in one of them. He had like this fake business in another one. So the guy was doing really good and was like, "Hey man, I need more pot. Can you grow more weed?" And I'm like, "Cool, dude. Yeah, of course I want to grow more weed." He's like, "Okay, I'm going to give you a hydro system. I'm going to give you all the right cuts. I'm going to teach you how to run this stuff." Because at the time, I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just learning, and the internet for me was a scary place. This was like 2006 or 7, so I wasn't interested on any risk at all. At that time, my friend was telling me people were getting busted buying stuff online and going to hydro stores and getting followed back to their place. So I was really kind of skittish, but I wanted to do it. So he gave me all this equipment. He gave me the headband. He gave me, oh man, the abusive OG. Like these were killer cuts at that time. And so 2 lights turned into 6. Then I went over and grew for him at his place, and it was just like dun 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 dun. It all accelerated really fast. And then I started making money and partnered up with the guy in a commercial unit. We were renting this 1,000 square foot commercial unit, doing that, and I ended up going my own way and got into a 2,000 square foot commercial unit. So it was just like double, and I was only like 23 at this time, or yeah, 23, 24. And so things ramped up really quick. The hydro system, I have to mention, was really cool. Just before I keep going, that this guy gave me, he would go collect the soy sauce 5-gallon buckets from the sushi bars and drill holes in the bottom and made his own system, right, with the master bucket at the bottom. You know, it was like a drain and fill system. And I thought it was so cool. We're building this thing out of PVC and shit, and it's leaking, and we're making it work, and we're trying to seal it up. And it was, at that time, it was just so much more raw. Growing was something that you learned from a friend that was so secret, man. Like my best friends didn't know what I was doing until I had to tear grows down, and I would ask them to help me. And I've been so just kept that way even now. So anyway, fast forward, we're in that 2,000 square foot commercial unit, and we're doing well. We're building it out. It's all good for a couple years, and then my partner left the water on, flooded the place. The neighbor complained, and that was it. The landlord came and shut that down real quick, threatened me, and so I got kind of bummed out, and I just kind of just downsized to 4 lights in my house. And in that time, I met my wife. We started a family, and so that moved us along to like 2014. I had my son, and 2015 comes along. I have my daughter, and you know, we're having some personal things that made us want to get out of San Diego at that time. And 2016 happens, and my friend calls me and says, "Dude, they're going legal in Humboldt. They've created a program for people to move into it." And so I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, like, I'm tired of being in SoCal, and I've shut down my grows. Like, I can do that with my family. I can go raise my kids in a legal situation, and I can homestead and live a cleaner life. You know, I was getting into organic growing and understanding like the whole reality of the pharmaceutical world, and I was transitioning my outlook on things. So I looked at a lot of different properties in Humboldt, and I had friends that already had roots in the place. So I was like, man, I can do this. I sold my house in Oceanside and bought a property in Humboldt and went for it. Best personal decision I made for my family. Worst financial disaster I could imagine. I can't. Oh, you're.
Sorry, I muted because I was making noise. I said that
Yeah.
I was wondering if you regretted selling that place in Oceanside.
I do. I wish I would have just done it differently. I wish that would have leveraged the equity that I had. I was happy.
Right.
I doubled up on the value of my home in like 6-7 years. Nice.
I mean, the hard part is that it seems like, you never know this kind of stuff, like with the stock market or houses or whatever. But when you bought, like the area that you bought in had been going like this for a couple decades. It was on a good streak, It just legal changed that a bit, So
it did. I bought my house in Oceanside on a short sale in 2009. So I scored heavy. And then when I went to sell, it had doubled. I was like, man, I accomplished my goals. That was all I wanted to do, was double my equity. And it happened so fast. So if I would have done it different, I would have just leveraged the equity that I had, borrowed against it, and bought. But I was a kid. I was like 27. This was 10 years ago.
I mean, hindsight's 2020, but like, it's nice, if it would have worked out differently, you wouldn't have had any regrets, right? Like if Humboldt continued to boom, like it was, you wouldn't be saying this right now, So, like I said, we don't have a crystal ball.
No.
Now looking at it, it's like, man, that spot in Oceanside must have gone up in value many times.
It doubled since I sold it.
I mean, the other part of it though too is that, like, I mean, that's it sucks when like what's best financially is different than what's best familial wise.
Right.
So
it was an important move. My son is pretty special, pretty heavy on the spectrum. He's special needs, and he was eloping. So he was running out. He was finding a way to escape and running out into the street, and like, we couldn't take it. It was like living in a traditional neighborhood in San Diego isn't conducive to kids like that, is what we thought. We had some other stuff that made us want to get out of there. So it was like, let's go. Let's go start our lives in a safer place. And we found this amazing spot in Humboldt. Like I was telling Francis before the show, it was just like, to us, it was like, clean, school, safe, private, like check. Great for growing, So, yeah, it was a tough one to swallow after the fact, but at the time it was so beautiful, man. It is so beautiful still. Like as a family, we developed our property. As a family, we started this business. As a family, we went through it, and now, I mean, I didn't go bankrupt. I didn't lose my property. I paused my grow last year because I'm starting a business doing in another industry, but I don't feel like I failed. I feel like the system failed us. And whether it was pre-designed to shut us down or end of the small grower, that's to be debated. I'm a not government truster over here, so my theories are probably as extreme as anyone's. But I took that risk because I wasn't happy with the life that we were living and where we were. So it still was the right decision. It still was for me and my family. And it's brought me other opportunities. We ended up finding this old abandoned, burned down motel, picked it up, and we're about to start an Airbnb. And so you know, when one door closes, another one opens, I think. This all brought me here. Getting up to Humboldt, it brought me right in the screen in front of you guys. So no regrets, man. It all just happens for a reason. So yeah, anyway, I went through all the struggles of legal weed, had our ups and downs, got raided and all that, everything in between. And the hardest part of all of it, besides the money, was losing the genetics that I had. I was so happy with my OGs, and yeah, they took the weed whacker to them. They're gone.
All your mom's gone. Everything gone.
Yeah, the important ones to me was the Triple X OG and the San Fernando that I brought up with me.
And you didn't share those with anyone that you could get them back?
I did, and they didn't keep them alive. My one friend told me he was gonna S1 it and didn't, and he lost it. And my other friends, they lost their situations. They left Humboldt, and by the time they were gone, it was over. So fast forward to 2021, 22. Yeah, things started to slow down on the market and get worse. So I feel like surviving those last 10 years, I can deal with anything. I went head on with bureaucratics, politicians, government officials, tax officials, county people, state. I had to deal with the Army Corps, the Water Board, Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, the cannabis programs really got you to know your local government agencies because you had to talk to most of them. Building and planning, fish and game, forestry, so on and so forth. Fire department. Everybody gets their say. Fire department's big because they determine how wide they want your road, where the turnouts have to be, all that kind of stuff. So, you know.
I've dealt with all that. I've had to do culvert replacements. I've been doing road work. Actually, this winter, I've got to do another culvert. That's a mandatory Fish and Wildlife requirement. I had to do all the environmental studies, the CEQAs, you know, and I'm just me. There's no investor support. I did this just from growing dope and money I saved, selling my house, and just making it work. I mean, everybody out there knows what this game is about. If you're watching this, you know that you're in the weed game. You care about weed. You're passionate, and that's what fueled this for me. Was trying to become independent, growing dope, and my love for the medicine that we create. That's what it is for me, the medical thing. Actually, when I talked to the state, I got to do some state stuff recently. The girl told me I'm one of the only medical only licenses in California. You can be medical or rec or a combination of both, and I'm one of the only strictly medical licenses left.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't know it either. I thought people in Humboldt were on the same program that I'm on.
I didn't know that you could only do one or the other. I thought you were able to have both licenses for rec and medical, and I thought there was more people still doing medical.
I think there is, but she said in Humboldt, I'm one of the only ones that are strictly medical. Yeah. So Humboldt's gone from like 2,500 cultivators to I think there's like 500 active cultivation licenses. It's been a pretty heavy squeeze, and my community is it's suffering. When you look around, it's not thriving like it was, unfortunately. But for me, the beauty is in the land. It's I feel so good every time I'm home. It's hard to leave.
Yeah, we've done podcasts with other people from Humboldt. One person I think of is Kevin Jodry, and like looking out his window during the podcast, you know, you can tell it's paradise. You know,
yeah, it's a spectacle.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to be amongst the magic trees and so close to the ocean.
It's just
It's an
nice.
amazing place. Yeah.
It's nice. It's not overly populated, you know. I mean, it's but there's I mean, there's a lot of changes. It's sort of like weed and weed sort of like boomed all these different towns that had fallen apart after logging. And then when the boom went away, now people are struggling to find their, and I think like what he was talking about, I think a lot of people, because a lot of people in Mendo were like this, is like when the legal first came, they were hopeful that even if they had to take less money, they were hopeful that they'd be able to do something stable and like kind of live their life and provide good weed and all that. And so, a lot of people jumped in and it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And so there's kind of been an exodus, I would say.
And then things changed, right? Things were something, and then it changed.
I mean, it
So
happened pretty quick. Kind of like I feel like California's, and it's every state really, but California's original sin was like allowing all the stack licenses to happen right away. And so there's never really been a good answer for like, this is how much herb we sell through the legal channels or the medical channels, and then we grow X amount. And so by allowing all these giant gardens and stuff, it's just it made a lot of problems immediately, I feel. And like the places that were hurt the worst was our area. Mendo, Humboldt, Trinity, all the traditional like heart of like cannabis culture in California as far as growers. It all started to shift. Indoor all went to Sacramento. Tons of outdoor was in Santa Barbara and like these desert areas in Southern California and places that had never been before. It's just totally different, And in
Yeah, I
all
think that.
honesty, oh sorry,
Go
like
ahead. Go ahead.
um, this is like a totally different debate or whatever. But I'll just say that like that everybody has a different idea of like what craft is, or
we've
like
had this conversation.
yeah, or like where craft stops and commercial begins. But in general, right, like all of the mountain and hill grows that were growing relatively small amounts of weed, that weed was better than like the factory farmed weed that we have now. And it was a
Oh yeah.
significant difference. And it's a lot easier to grow a few 100 pounds of really nice weed than it is to grow 4 acres or 8 acres or 20
Yeah.
acres or whatever it might be. And so
That's
the sad
stressful.
thing for the sad things for customers is the customers probably would have liked the old system of a bunch of like, random small hill growers and people spaced about, but that's not what we got. Because all those people, like he was saying before, like 10 minutes ago, it's like he's just me, or whatever, right? So it's like all of a sudden you have to meet with all these different agencies and you have to work on these different things and you have to come up with money and you have to like wear 15 different hats and you're at board of supervisors meetings, where before it was basically like you just don't get caught and you can kind of do whatever you want. And now it's like you're like, man, I wish I could just grow, but instead I've got to meet with all these state agencies and I got to do this and I got to fill out all this paperwork and I got to get CEQA'd. And it was like there's a certain kind of person that grows herb, and that person is not usually the most like organized. Let's deal with a bunch of government. Let's deal with a bunch of tax people. Let's set this up. It's just kind of not that way,
And the
you know.
people that moved to Humboldt because they wanted to be private, right? They
Yep.
weren't the people that actually had those skill sets to go to like a community board like a city hall meeting, like that's not what they were good at. They were good at growing weed. So like going into like a meeting, like a city council meeting, and like eloquently explaining, things, it wasn't like what they were good at.
It kind of gave me like a little sympathy towards lobbyists, right? Because I had to do some of that, and you go in front of like in my case it was Mendo, but you go in front of like the board of supervisors, and it's like you're trying to convince 8 or 9 people that are all between like mid 40s to 70s that know nothing about weed, how they should make rules about your weed and what rules will like help you and what rules will really hurt you. And they don't know anything about it at all, you know? So it was like you had to really try to educate people. And then, you know, there was a bunch of people maybe not from here don't realize this, but like I would say weed people have always been sort of like I don't want to say like a minority, but like the who's who of Humboldt and Mendo, you know, the landowners, the high end types and all that, they don't really like weed. And they never have. And so with the changes and the legality and stuff like that, like it wasn't like necessarily even like welcomed with open arms. There was a significant portion of people that were against it and went to every board of supervisors meeting. I'm sure you're familiar in Humboldt, like and tried to stop things or didn't like their neighbor getting a permit or didn't want this. And they kind of killed the goose that laid the golden egg without realizing it, you know, in my
They
opinion.
did. They did, and part of me thinks like, well, I know they don't want people in the hills in Humboldt. The ordinance they put out gave people more square footage if they move their grow down to prime ag zoned properties, and that's pretty much just near the river. So it's like that was also a financial play. People were selling these, they're called RRRs, which was when you relocated your grow. And so they don't want, for sure, they don't want people in the hills. And I really don't think that the leaders, the political leaders of the county, want people growing weed at all. They want like 5 to 10 extra large corps growing all the weed, and they want to flush everybody out of the hills because it's kind of like a nuisance to their situation.
You know, it's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but maybe we can touch on it now, is how people don't realize that there's like two sides. It's kind of like, you know, the people that like Trump and the people that don't like Trump. Well, in Humboldt, there's the people that like weed and the people that don't like weed. And there's actually a significant amount of both, you know? And, you know, you told me and that, like the book of seeds that you gave me, the woman who died, her family was on the other side. She was like, you know, the lone wolf. She was the outcast of the family that was growing weed. And her rest of her family in Humboldt County, they weren't happy with that. And to the point that, like, when she died, her legacy was almost lost because these seeds were left in their hands. And I'm just
It was hidden.
grateful. I'm just grateful that you got them and that they weren't lost to her family that doesn't appreciate cannabis.
Well, we were actually talking about it before we went live, and Gabby was like doing what he's doing now and wandering around his house. But even
I'm
like up
just
in
shutting
Humboldt
off
and
my air
Mendo,
purifier.
like there's a chunk of people that are really into weed, and there's a much larger chunk of people that were there because weed was financially viable and it gave them the life they wanted. And then there was a big chunk of people that like didn't really like weed at all, but were willing to like grow some weed to like make some money. But they were essentially like they were kind of what you were talking about. They were connected to these different families, or they were like from there. They were old logging families or what have you. And like they weren't like weed people, but they were fine with making money. And then I feel like, and this is kind of like off track a little bit, but when he was just talking about like they wanted to move all the weed from the hills into the ag valleys, right? The problem with that is that the ag valleys were all owned by these other kind of people. The vineyard owners, the ranchers, the farmers, the old school salt of the earth Humboldt Mendo dudes. And we used to have this like sort of like standoff where it's like the weed people were up in the hills, we're up the mountain, right? We're out of sight, out of mind. And like the old school families owned all the ag land. And so when we went legal, all of a sudden the county was like, I want you to put your weed farm in this valley. And then your neighbor is like some 5th generation rancher or, you know, vineyard or orchard guy. And he's like, what in the hell are these weed people doing next door? I hate them. I don't want them here. What are they doing here? Right. And so they didn't really realize that. They just thought, oh, it's ag. We'll move it on to ag land. Right. But the culture didn't really want it out of the hills and into the valleys. And then the weird part is that this isn't as bad in Humboldt and Mendo as it is in like in Southern California, but the hills are basically clean in the sense that in a lot of the valleys, ag uses a lot of chemicals that are banned in cannabis and they persist. So there's a lot of like valley ag land that sprayed stuff that was perfectly legitimate to spray at the time, but ruins the land for quite a while for cannabis growing, because you're not allowed to use many of the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides that ag uses in canna. So a lot of that ag land is weird. So the hills were cleaner, you know, happier. I even think you grow better weed at altitude, you
You
know?
do. You
So
do.
like I think a lot of those hill grows that are like 1,600 feet, 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet, whatever above sea level, you actually like just the way that the weather is and the fall, like everything, it's better herb.
Hey, I'm going to ask something of you, John. Um, I would like you to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. It might be a little bit annoying to have to do it and undo it, but we are getting a little bit of feedback from your microphone. So um, just please unmute yourself when you want to talk. And if you start talking and you're muted, we'll let you know.
But you know, a lot of times people talk about like in wine and you know whatever, like the terroir, you know, like the land and the environment that influences like grapes or what have you to come out, varietals to come out a certain way. And I do think, having lived here for a long time, that like you can see like the herb in Humboldt, like in southern Humboldt and like and Petrolia and different places like that, the weeds one way, and like you get into like the little bit of the hotter zones, it's a different way. And what sucks is that we already had, just by accident almost, I think Mendo and Humboldt and parts of Lake and Trinity are some of the best places to grow herb in all of California, like weather wise, climate wise, a bunch of different stuff. And economically and stuff and everything like that, like legal has moved to like Sacramento and the Southern California desert and Santa Barbara and different places not from here. And those places aren't as nice to grow weed. They just like made their laws more acceptable. The city council or the board of supervisors in the county was more accepting than Mendo or Humboldt. And so a bunch of production shifted there, but the environment isn't very good. And that matters when you're growing outside. And I think part of the reason why Humboldt and Mendo and stuff like that and the Emerald Triangle or whatever became legendary, some of it was just, it was remote and out of the way and you could get away with growing. But another part of it was that like the climate often led to good weed. You know, it did. Weed likes that hot day and that colder night. It likes the moisture coming in off the ocean at night. There's a lot about this little zone that you know helps to make good cannabis.
For sure.
There's no doubt in my mind that the Triangle is the best place in California to grow dope. In my microclimate, it goes down in the summer and in the fall into the 40s every night, and then it climbs up above 90. And I couldn't even get my indoor grow below 60, 65. You know, I was always trying to push my cold temps down, push them down. But man, there's weed sometimes that I see that I can grow, or I see from my friends that look incredible, as good as my other friends indoors. And even when I grow my own indoor, the same genetics, it smokes inferior. Like it just doesn't have the punch. It doesn't have the terps. And if I truly believe if you have the same grower growing indoor and outdoor and the same genetics, the smoke from the outdoor is going to be just a little bit more desirable, a little more dense, a little more flavorful, a little more body and soul. Indoors is great, and that's where I started. I love growing indoor. I'm growing a little 4-lighter right now. But yeah, I think weed from the triangle is just so special.
I mean, let me see something real fast. I think that weed in the triangle is great. I think that it can be very similar as you go down the California coast. You know, like I think the Sonoma County, we can grow just as good a weed as the Emerald Triangle. The climate is very similar. As a matter of fact, it's almost identical. If you look at when you're in the Sonoma coast, it's very similar to being, on the Mendocino coast. And then as you move inland into Sonoma County, it becomes very similar to inland Mendocino County, where, you can get much hotter days and then nights where the temperatures drop. And we have, hills and small mountains, up, like
I mean, really
Sonoma Valley, Glen Ellen.
The biggest thing that hurt Sonoma when it came to growing was that all of your land and home prices spiked around the time that the green rush started. And if you're a grower with some cash trying to find a property and it's affordable in Mendo or Humboldt, and then you're looking at somewhere nice in Sonoma and it's 10 times the cost, then, it sort of kept.
That's actually 100. That's 100% it, Francis. And I don't want to take away from what you said, John, but what made the Emerald Triangle really good was the climate, but also the cheap prices of land. You just don't get that type of land very easily the further south you go. So
the triangle was depressed post timber, and that made it really cheap, and that made it affordable for a lot of younger grower types to sort of come up and acquire like a rundown crappy piece of property and start growing weed on it. Like, I was joking with homie before we started again about you'd buy a really rundown spot, and then your indoor would come in and you and your girl would redo the bathroom, and then the indoor would come in again and you'd do the floor in the kitchen, and then the outdoor would come in and you'd have more money and you'd do the roof and maybe part of the deck. And then after 5 or 6 years of being there, because you're there all the time, you've reinvested a bunch of your money from weed into making where you live all the time nicer. And so there was thousands of properties around the area that went from really run down and poor to really quaint and picturesque and nicer and all that. And I mean, there's downsides to it too, but that's what I would just see over and over and over again was people would reinvest some of their herb money into where they lived. They'd put in gardens, they'd fix their fences, they'd redo their houses, and then that and so I don't know, it just the cheapness of the land and the quality of the herb, and that's one of the real things that when wine guys talk about there's certain valleys or certain places where that bring out a certain varietal. I just think we got lucky in that Mendo and Humboldt and Trinity and some of these places like that were just super conducive to nice weed. And I think what he said before, people don't realize, but because it's dry here, that difference where you have a 95-degree day, but it might be 52 or 48 at night, that temperature swing makes for some good canna. It allows the plant to cool down. I think it allows the plant to make terpenes. I think it just it really makes a big difference versus places that stay warm all the time. Canna likes that day to night temperature difference.
I just think that Ukiah, Redwood Valley,
yeah,
it just gets hotter there than what I would think would be optimal. Like, for
But even
instance,
like, I mean, I live in Redwood Valley and it does get hot, but it's like every night it's going to be in the 50s.
right, but during the daytime, your terps are just getting evaporated. So like for me, Sonoma County, and you're a fan of where you live and I'm a fan of where I live, but Sonoma County, we can still get a temperature shift that I think is adequate without it being as hot during the daytime.
No, I get it. Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
look, Sonoma County is a milder county, more of it. But also that's risky too, because there's this thing, not to get all technical for people that don't live here, but a big deal when you're trying to grow weed is like you're trying to grow weed kind of close, somewhat close to the ocean, so you get some of that nighttime coolness ocean effect, but not too close where you're in a fog bank or it's too moist or too wet because you'll rot. And if you go up and down Humboldt and Mendo and even Sonoma, there's places that are like way too wet and way too humid, and then there's places nearby it that are high up enough up or just set enough back that they get that moisture from the ocean, but they're not like swamped in the fog, and that makes a big difference. Like John, I'm sure like there's so many microclimates in Mendo and Humboldt. There's so many places where like one property is absolutely ideal. Okay, so this is like a 30-second story, but it won't mean anything to you, John, but it will to Gabby. So we had a buddy that died a couple of years ago, Chuck, and he got this place out in Comchi, and Comchi, he had it in the valley, and when the fog would come in, it would roll into his property every morning. But we had another buddy that was a little bit farther back from him and up the hill, and you could walk out of his house at 7 in the morning and see the fog beneath, but it didn't come up. So his property was bright and sunny and warm and lovely. And Chuck's was sort of like locked into fog till 10 or 11 in the morning a bunch of times. So sometimes it was like a quarter-mile difference from ideal to grow herb to problematic. But if you could get it in those spots that were ideal, I mean, the other thing I think we should say too is like when you were talking about like the terpenes and the different flavors, I think the sun is the best light. And you can't control the environment outside, which makes it problematic. But if you have a nice environment that's conducive to your plant, you can't get indoor lights that are as nice as the sun. The sun emits all the spectrum in massive amounts, all the UV, all the infrared, everything. It just emits all of it. And so it's weird because I've never understood it, but I would like take indoor plants I'd vegged all winter long and I'd bring them out in spring, and I couldn't believe how much happier they looked after a week or two in sunlight. It would kind of trip me out, you know? And I don't know why that is exactly, but I just basically eventually decided that the something about the sun, you know. And
well,
one more thing, and then I'll shut up.
no,
Maybe
go
we
ahead.
can talk about the seeds. But one thing I think we should say is that another thing John mentioned is that I think a lot of people around America have a negative idea of outdoor because they're used to smoking some like maybe some commercial outdoor that was packaged and shipped. Like, but when you live here, okay, or you live in a place, not just here, if you live somewhere that's like really conducive to outdoor canna, like smoking some of your friends' stuff, smoking some of your stuff, smoking your neighbor's stuff that was like carefully handled and like done nicely, you can be blown away by how good it is. And so I think a lot of people are used to like commercial outdoor and they haven't seen like the heady local outdoor, like, you know,
You know
and
what's funny about that, Francis?
huh.
I'm just going to distract you for a second. It used to be the same thing about indoor, but in reverse. So, like when people first started growing indoor, they didn't know how to do it. They were doing it poorly. They were just putting a plant in some potting soil, from Home Depot and then just watering it with water for 3 months. And so, indoor used to be kind of meh for a while. It was, a lot of people weren't growing really good, because they didn't know how. And when people were putting plants in the ground in, decent soil, they were getting a much better product. So I think it's interesting how
I
that's
will tell
changed a
you
little
what
bit.
you just said about that. The best weed in Mendo that I used to smoke a long time ago came from people that grew in the same holes year after year, and they'd been amending, their holes for some time. And the weed that would come out of those 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old holes, where they'd been amending it every year and adding different organics to it and like kind of letting it build, like that was the nicest weed at the time, you
I,
know?
I'm just gonna throw it out there. What I think makes the best weed is a combination of everything.
Yeah.
And so I think mixed light. And the reason why I think mixed light makes the best weed is because we have the sun. Okay. If we need to add light, we can. We don't have to. But more important than that is being able to control the climate in the
Yeah.
greenhouse makes a big difference. So if you have the sun and then you have control, and then you can add extra light if needed, or for instance, how about just doing the light depth,
Or
and being able to like have your plants finish when you have a decent amount of intensity of light instead of like in the fall in October and November, depending on where you live, your plants may not be getting any light at all.
there's a there's more places in Humboldt than Mendo that are like this, but there's a lot of places where like their spring or their fall is kind of squirrely. And so greenhouses and stuff like that were sort of the way that they could like, extend the season and make that kind of stuff happen. Uh it's weird in the sense that like if you grow weed in a greenhouse, like with woven poly or something, the weed will probably look nicer. But there was sometimes this weird thing where like outdoor, and I think it's because the light oxidizes, it would be darker than the same strain grown in a greenhouse, but sometimes it would be more psychoactive. Like I'm fascinated by the different things that happen because people like all this weed, where I really think like this is a total tangent, but you really know where I really think like the testing fails us is that I don't really care what it says, the weed, the terpenes and the THC and all that. I'm curious about how it affects us, right? Like what about the THC and the terpenes? What about that makes it racy or uncomfortable or warm and happy? Or why does some weed last longer and some is shorter, And so growing weed a long time, I've noticed that like a lot of times like we would grow for market in like in woven poly greenhouses and stuff, and the greenhouse weed would be definitely greener, lighter green, and nicer looking. But sometimes wouldn't smoke as nice as the pure outdoor that visually looked like not as attractive.
Now, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Well, first
sure.
of all, I want to make a statement and then ask a question. So the first thing is not all greenhouse materials are made the same,
No, not at
right?
all.
And back in the day, when like me and you first started doing this, having a greenhouse material that wasn't um, see-through was
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
We were willing to sacrifice the loss of light to make it be more private. Okay.
But y-
Nowadays, we don't have to do that. So we can use an actual greenhouse material that has a better transmission. Now,
but you know what's weird,
one more thing.
Gabby?
Let me just say this
Huh.
one more thing and then I'll let you finish. Okay. The other thing is, are we comparing plants grown in a greenhouse that were grown in a container against plants that were grown outdoors in the ground in soil that's been nourished? Because that's not a fair, comparison. If we're talking about growing in a container in both, okay, then I think the greenhouse has an advantage. If we're talking about growing in a container in a greenhouse or in the ground outside, I think that that's going to have make a big difference.
I
Go
would
ahead.
say that all factors make a difference, but what I was talking about more is like, or what Gabby was just talking about, we all started using what's called woven poly on our greenhouses because it was like it obscured what was inside the greenhouse. but it still let a bunch of light in. And so what we found is that light diffusion, the plants were a little happier and a little greener and looked a little nicer, but the weed came out a little different than if you grew under like clear poly or full outside. And so woven poly alters the light. It kills some of, it absorbs some of the UV, it diffuses some of it to some degree. It's altering the sunlight, where if you have open air hoops or you have full outdoor, the sun's just hitting it raw. There's no filter, there's nothing altering it, there's nothing changing it. And I don't know. But I do think in some ways, like depending on where you are, sometimes greenhouses in Mendo or Humboldt, like sometimes that light diffusion, like the sun is too powerful in Cali. And so sometimes that light diffusion, the plants are a little happier because they're not like getting pounded quite as hard by the sun's rays all day long. But one of the things, and I know we're going to talk about his seeds in a second, and maybe I'll just like pregame it a second, right? Where people should know that like when I first moved to Mendo, and it was like this in Humboldt too, it's like every road, every neighborhood, it was a seed culture for the most part, right? Like the clone culture hadn't really took off there yet. And so people would grow things, and obviously they would gravitate towards things that did better on their hill or on their street or where they were at, right? And so there usually would be like a one or two nerds in the neighborhood that would be like the seed preservers and make all the strains and have all the lineage and stuff. And those people would often supply with seeds a bunch of their friends, right? And then breeding would happen in Humboldt and Mendo, where it was like you'd have your patch of females, and then like downwind and somewhere different, you'd have like maybe 5 or 8 males in 5-gallon pots or something. And when they started dropping pollen, you'd like collect the pollen and you'd walk over and you'd start marking branches on your favorite girls in your weed patch, and then you'd start pollinating them. And so everyone outdoor grew from seed. Mixed pheno pounds were the norm. People were fine with mixing pounds of as long as it was the same strain, essentially, right? And this changed when people started wanting clone only stuff like Purple Urkel or Sour Diesel or this or that. But I'm talking like 80s and 90s, early 2000s, the triangle, right? And so there used to be a lot of local seed stock of different things that people grew outside every year. There used to be a ton of diversity. All the different hills, all the different neighborhoods, they all had sort of their own like little recipes for different things. And I think like actually when Gaby first opened his store, that was really when the change happened, because when Purple Urkel and GDP and some of these other things started becoming popular, Mendo and Humboldt went from a seed culture to like, are you growing this clone? I'll buy as much of this clone as you can produce, whether, and it went from the purple craze, and then it kind of went into Kush and diesels, and then it went into cookies and Skittles and stuff.
When do you think
And
it started, Francis? Like, what do you think
right
the
when you
first
open
strain?
oh
What was
three
the?
oh four,
But what I'm saying, what was the first strain that you think?
I call it the purple craze, because before the GDP Urkel Mendo P sort of like explosion thing, any good weed you grew worked. Right? Like if you grew weed and you did a good job growing weed, there would be a market for it. And so that allowed all that diversity I was just talking about. And really what changed it was dudes from the Bay coming up to Mendo and Humboldt and just being like, I want as much of this specific thing as you can get. Right? And then the growers, being, entrepreneurs and smart, are like, okay, so I can grow this other stuff and I can try to find a buyer. Or I can just grow all this, and every time so and so comes to town, they'll clean me out and all my friends too. And
But do you
so,
think it was the Urkel, or do you think it was the Sour Diesel that
oh, it
really
was the
started
Irk.
that?
Dude,
The
like
Urkel.
I'm not going to mention any names, but like you remember how we had some like bigger customers, from Laytonville and some different stuff? Every single large indoor gardener or dep gardener was doing some kind of perps, because the dudes from the Bay that were coming up, they would just clean them out. Didn't matter. And so it made it easy. And so the downside of that, and why I'm like so interested, and then I'm going to shut up and John's going to talk, is that seed collections like he got a hold of, and the story of how he got a hold of it, that used to be the Mendo and Humboldt norm. And as these clone onlys kind of came through, more people just started growing Skittles or cookies or sour diesel or Kush or whatever. And a lot of these old heirlooms, like a lot of these old neighborhood grows, these neighborhood seeds and stuff like that started going by the wayside. And people stopped starting like making fresh seeds of it all the time, because they were just getting clones. Maybe they were getting clones from a dispensary. Maybe their buddy down the street did a nursery in spring and sold clones to a bunch of his neighborhood friends. And so people stopped doing the popping the seeds, sexing the seeds. And a lot of it was dominated because the brokers coming up didn't want those old strains. They were looking specifically for these things. And then growers started adapting and making sure they had those things. John seems like he got to Humboldt well after that process had already started, but it sounds like, the woman he's going to talk about was one of those like weed nerds, old breeders, people that did that, and she probably used to supply a bunch of her neighbors. And those were probably like the local strains that had been mixed, a bunch of sativas with some Afghanis and some different things. And, people would find stuff that would work in their neighborhood or their microclimate, you know, like, my buddy Tom Hill or whatever, like the deep chunk, that was popular because it did well underneath the manzanitas. But anyway, I'll shut up. And John, I hope you're hydrated and you munched on something, because why don't we segue from that into how you came across these seeds and a little bit of the woman's story and just kind of all that.
Okay. So yeah, Gabby's got the book. And just to start it out, like when I got this collection, it was in like 10 different boxes. It wasn't organized. It was, most of the seeds were in little, she was storing them in black little dime bags, I think that was like the OG way of doing it back in the day, to keep the UV off your seeds. So my wife and I spent a fair amount of time organizing this and cleaning it up. And even in my mind, it was like just to have as like this relic antique book of seeds, even if we weren't going to pop them, because I had no idea. I got all these seeds 10 years after she had passed away, and they weren't stored in a fridge. So to start from the beginning, I was telling Francis, my daughter was going to school with the granddaughter of this woman. And in our smart little community, everybody knows everybody, and it's pretty easy to see who's growing dope. So they knew what I was doing and got to talking. And her partner, before she passed away, was actually the one who gave me this collection. She is coming to the end of her life as well, and wanted to see these seeds. She wanted to see them growing, because she had participated and assisted. I'll call her E. Her family doesn't want her to be exposed. So she assisted E in producing all these seeds. She was there every step of the way. So she gave them to me thinking, hey, I want you to pop these seeds one more time so we can see E's work. in action. And so I gave it a shot. I popped I must have tried attempting 10 or 12 different varieties. And I think I had similar results that Gabby had. I would get a little sprout on some of them to pop, and then they would just peter out and die. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I don't know how Gabby and I got to talking, but I think I saw him doing his preservation work, and I just hit him up because at the time, I was going really hard at my legal thing. I'm raising my kids. I just have a full plate, and diving into these seeds and doing embryo rescue and researching how to get it done kind of seemed overwhelming to me at the time.
I think what happened was I posted a picture of a seed that at the time I was calling it embryo rescue, but that was an incorrect term. I've since then changed it to I did a C-section. Okay, because I literally I pulled the embryo out of the shell, but then I just placed it in cocoa, and the embryo was healthy. So that was the key, is that when we opened it up, you could see that there was a healthy embryo in there. But I put it in the cocoa, and it just didn't have enough strength to survive. And so, like I said, I was incorrectly calling that embryo rescue, because when you do embryo rescue, you're not only doing that under a hood, but then you're putting it in tissue culture media, and that's what I've been learning how to do with my mentor Jesse from the Mothership Labs, and I've gone through a bunch of stuff in the last year and had to move, my nursery, and I wanted to make sure that like these seeds are like the most important stuff that I have in cannabis, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't start them and not be prepared to take care of them and then breed with them. And so like now I'm finally in a little bit more stable spot, and I'm ready to, you know, start popping these seeds and start doing the embryo rescue. And so that's why I decided to hit you up and say, "Hey, we need to finally do this podcast we've been talking about for a year, and talk about her story." And you wrote a little something about her, you know, and you sent it to me, and I can read it. But I was hoping that you would tell us just like a little bit more about her. You told me about like how she had a few patches, and then she moved to indoors, and I I, I know that her family wants it to be private. Like we don't want to like out her name, but I want to do the best we can to like describe her. And you used the description. She was a female weed warrior, and you know number one, cannabis today is still predominantly male, but we're talking about in the 80s, 80s and 90s, it was even more male dominated, then than it is now. So to like have this female that was doing and preserving, doing all this amazing work, I just want to make sure that we honor her as much as possible in this podcast, and tell her story as much as we can without you know breaking the parents' wishes of, we're not going to out them or anything. But also to say, like, we were talking about, her family isn't into cannabis, and even though she was from Humboldt and her family's from Humboldt, they were on the side of, they're not into it.
Well, that's what I was. There's a lot of people up here that made money off weed that kept it very quiet where the money came from. That was very common. And there might be there might be a family member that gets really involved in it, and the rest of the family doesn't really want all their friends and neighbors knowing that person was involved, because it still had a stigma. And I think that stigma hasn't really left. It was sort of like you were doing something dirty, or you were cheating in some way, you know? But yeah,
I muted you.
that's fine.
Explain this enough. I'm sorry. So, John, do you want to do your best to tell a little bit about her story and who she was and paint a picture of her?
Yeah, I'll try my best. Like I said, I never met her. I can only kind of relay what I've been told, but it's a really inspiring story. And um, I think that her story as a female grower is unique. But I think as a grower in general, I think this is a lot of folk stories. And her, just to like touch on the family wanting to keep her anonymous, um, to give context, her daughter is a social worker now. Um, and as a child, she was sort of forced to help her mom take care of these growing plants. And I think as someone who didn't smoke, I think, that isn't the part of the legacy that she wants for her mom. I think she wants to remember her as the loving mother that she was. But for people like us, it's an inspirational story. And I am still um, of the culture of preserving genetics. I love seeds. Um, Most of the clones onlys that I have, I search out other hybrids that people have made so I can back cross to my clones, and I keep my own seeds too, in case of a disaster or something. But also for passion of growing seeds, I love it. Anyway, so let's start in the '80s. She was a young woman, made her way to Southern
Hey, I'm
Humboldt.
sorry to interrupt you. I just want to comment on something that you said. Um, I understand. I don't know if you said it was her daughter's wish or someone else's wish that um, because they're social workers and not into weed, that they didn't want her name and stuff to be used, and they don't want her to be remembered this way. But that is her story. And now what's happening, and not by us, but her story is being edited by people. And they're saying, well, this isn't what's important. And while we're gonna respect their wishes, because it's just the right thing to do, um, I think it's wrong. And I kind of would say that, like, all right, and I'm just gonna be brief here. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm doing a recording with my grandma where she's telling our family history, and it's private, but I want to have it for future generations. And when I asked her to do this, she said that, first of all, she started crying because she thought it was such a beautiful thing to do. And, like, my grandma's turning 100 soon. And, her, like, my children's children may never know her, right? It's a good chance that they're not going to know her. And so to have these videos, but what she said is, she said, look, I don't want to tell some of the stories because they're sad. Okay. And I said, well, we have to, because, like, you can't just tell the happy stories, because that doesn't tell the whole picture. And I reminded her, like, on my dad's side, almost everyone died in the Holocaust, right? And if we decided to not tell the story because it's a sad story, or even something we're not proud of, now we're not telling our story. Like, now it's edited. And to know that cannabis was such an important part of this woman's life, and that she did so much, and her family is saying, we're just going to edit that out of the history books, I think that's kind of sad.
I agree, because it makes up her life and her purpose. And I told Francis before, like, if this is about medical, like for me, weed didn't save my life, but it helped me feel more complete. It helped me get my shit together mentally. And I feel it probably did that for this woman, and not only did that, it financially raised her kids, built them put a roof over their head, sustain them financially. So I agree to
That's
some.
something that's something that should be mentioned. I think what you just said right there is in Humboldt, in Mendo, there is a significant minority of female growers that used the bounty of growing weed to be able as a single mom a lot of times like raise kids and earn funds. And one of the things, if you want it to be, that can be there for Canna is you have a lot of family time. You have a lot of friend time. It like in that era, you were sort of isolated and insulated to a degree. But, it's like in the modern world where you spend a lot of time away from your family, there's cannabis people that used, that bounty or whatever to raise their kids, you know? And that is a big deal because, it's like I don't think that gets talked about like enough in the regard of like a lot of people stumble upon weed, you know. Her story and like Humboldt and our area or whatever, like, it's one of the places in America where there was actual like weed culture. And just like anything else, people got into it for all kinds of different reasons, sometimes multitudes of one, right? But just looking at this collection meant that in addition to being able to raise her family on it, she nerded out. I mean, this is full nerd out right here. Look at all of it. All these cute little labels and nice little handwriting and all these different collections of different stuff. Like, she got into it. It became more than just like grow some seeds, sell the weeds, support the fam, move on. Like, that shows love and dedication. And there's plenty of these collections that have been lost to time, lost to bad relatives, lost to fire, lost to moving. People don't care, but I mean, I don't even, what even, like, just looking at some of that stuff, like, there is a huge history there of just cannabis at different times. And I feel like cannabis reinvents itself every 5 or 10 years, and strains that were common become rare or legendary or unheard of. And it just keeps happening over and over. Like, look at that right there. Paraguay, 2006. What the hell is that? You know? But that's kind of cool because it's like people would bring weed from all over the world to our area and grow it there and see what it was about, you know? And that little catalog, all this neat handwriting, and stuff like that, whether it's hers or someone else's, it's like she spent enough time to save all this stuff to write down what it was, and um yeah, and I just think that's wild. And it's
She was
like
definitely a weed nerd. Look, I mean, you're right. Look, I used to just look through the catalog. Like, this is like through her catalog here, and it's obvious she was keeping up with the time. She was growing modern genetics throughout her career of the time, and so over the last 20 years, like, you guys have been growing longer than I have, but I've seen the waves, and when I started, there's so much more variety. Um,
mm-hmm.
in weed, it was like looking at this book, and now what are we down to? Candies,
Purple candy gas.
candies.
I mean, there's still
Yeah, it's
diversity
boring.
out there, but it gets harder and harder. Um, but the interesting part about this is like, because yeah, you're right. Even looking through it, like there's some stuff you can see where it's like local weed, this crossed by this, but then there's also like those square white packs that are from like the early like forum days and stuff like that. And just different blend, like Gabby's got one in sight right there, like that white pack right there. That used to be the height of how people would trade seeds in the early 2000s on forums and like early internet and stuff like that. And so yeah, it seems like she had local herb, and then she collected what was common and popular at the time and blended that in, or maybe kept it separate and just kept messing with stuff. Wait, go back, Gabby. Does that say AOTA? AOTA?
Yes, it does.
Do you
There's
remember the AOTA?
I've heard of it, but I don't remember the flower. Tell us,
Um,
Francis.
well, I'll just say our friend whose first initial begins with an E, when he lived down in Sebastopol, AOTA stands for all of the above, and it was like their local blend of basically of like however many strains that were like popular in their little like weed group or what have you, the AOTA. And there's a million strains like that of just like little neighborhood nicknames, little groups, little friend groups and stuff. People would make seeds all the time because I mean, even the first big indoor grow I ever saw, that it was like beds and they grew from seed and they went in there with snippers 10 days in and they just killed the males. Like that's how much of a seed culture it still was. We weren't like people weren't like propagating everything from clone was still really rare. You know, people grew seed. And so this was now it's like people pop seeds to pheno hunt, you know, and to look for a certain thing that they can clone out. But her era, um, that was the beginning of most plants was you pop seeds. You wanted more of it, you made more seeds. And so seeds were like the start of all cannabis growing. You know, you had to have a bunch of seeds. And so it looks like she does. She has a lifetime of you know, different types of stuff. I haven't seen the AOTA name in a long time. That's pretty funny.
Check this out. I'm blown away right now, but I just found seeds of sweet pink
Sweet pink
grapefruit.
grapefruit. Yeah.
And what's really cool about that is that I just hooked up with breeder
There's
Steve,
Steve.
and he made me an authorized propagator of his stuff. And the sweet pink grapefruit is one of the ones that I have, and I didn't even notice that it was in this collection. And then also looking right here, I'm thinking about our friend Golden Coast because we
Yeah.
got some Colombian
Colombian.
gold. And yeah, I mean, like, kind of like John said, I could stare at this collection for days. You know, I mean, I normally keep it in the refrigerator, so I don't do that. But yeah, I could just stare at this for days. And I do want to give him a chance to go back and finish telling the story because we interrupted him. But somebody kept, I've gotten a number of questions from people about, is this the Belladonna collection? And when I'm looking in here, there's a bunch of seeds labeled Belladonna. So I think it's safe to say, and we're not outing anyone, that this collection is not from Belladonna, but that this woman, living up in the area, she had connection to those seeds and has them in her collection as
Does
well.
that one say outside shed?
Yes. There's a
That's where
bunch
she
of
did most
stuff
of her
like
breeding.
that, you know.
There, I'm sure like that's the other funny thing about weed is sometimes there's notations that mean a lot to the person doing it, but later on you might be like, okay, that I don't know, you know. Anyway, sorry,
I'll
I
say one
just was,
thing.
huh?
She definitely played with Breeder Steve's work, and that was one thing that was like it's kind of touching to me because when I was 19, my friend, I was getting weed from a friend, and he was pushing shishkaberry, and it was the first branded weed that made an impact on me. And I just remember getting the back $60 an eighth, and it was just these giant, just beautiful purple stinking buds, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I'm going broke buying the shishkaberry every day, and thinking to myself, God damn, I need to start growing pot, dude. Like this weed is so good, and it's so expensive. I can't smoke enough of it, and that shishkaberry pushed me to start growing seriously. and move in that direction. I need to get my phone charger so you guys can talk for a minute. My phone's gonna.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see, but we have shishka berry seeds here as well. And I've already contacted Breeder Steve to let him know that we've got some shishka
I
in
mean,
the house.
in the seed game in the early 2000s, like there was sort of like after the Amsterdam folks, there was sort of like a new wave, and DJ Short and Breeder Steve and the original Brothers Grimm, there was some internet famous stuff, and Shishkaberry and like the Sweet Tooth 3, you know, and all that kind of stuff was like having a sort of heyday,
We have the
you know.
Sweet Tooth 3.1 now. Breeder Steve got me that, and it's just an S1. He thinks
He
of
made
the.
of the sweet,
He
yeah,
didn't
but it
make it.
was like,
Someone else made it, but he says it's the closest thing he's seen to the original
and
Sweet Tooth.
he did the same thing that Shanti did. He's like one of the dudes that, like when Switzerland first opened up, um, you know, and other places in Europe were tightening up. He went out to Switzerland, and so he was there with Shanti and those guys, like in the first few years when everybody was able to blow it up and like do big full sun, like, you know, stuff and push breeding and all that. Like they clamped down on it after a while, but that's where a lot of that like Breeder Steve Sweet Tooth Shishkaberry stuff comes from, is him being able to do that out there. So is that what most of this is just like packets of seeds with just various hand notations on them, or is this most of this her writing, or did you guys have to transcribe it and repackage it?
That's us. Those little white squares, that's me and my wife cleaning it up. But those white papers inside yeah, where Gabby's zooming, that's her and her partner when they were organizing the stuff. Yeah. And
so you kept the
she
original
told me,
little labels.
I kept as many as I could. Yeah, that were
Right.
legible. A lot of them were like the pencil was like, you know, smeared or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, we wanted to keep that for authenticity. I try to keep it as intact as I could. Even like the stuff that wasn't shucked all the way with leaves and stuff, I wanted to leave it in there to create the authentic effect that this is. And okay, so let's start in the 80s. She's
Okay.
like 30 something probably, starting in Bryceland. And I'm sure most of you people don't know what Bryceland is, but at one point it was a thriving community and that basically caught on fire and burned the town down. So she was there, her place caught on fire. She was doing the work, and I think what I was told was that she had a mentor, and it was a guy who was, you know, had been growing pot for a long time, and he kind of, I think, showed her the way.
Okay.
I think he sort of got her on track and taught her about sexing and making seeds. So her place burned down, and she moved out to Bloxburg, which is on the east side of Humboldt. Bryceland's on the west side between Redway and Shelter Cove. So Bloxburg is the opposite direction, still southern Humboldt. So I think she was there into the 90s, and that's where she finished her life, was out that direction. So without skipping over things, you know, there was all these evolutions of her growing, just like we all have. And from what I was told, it was mostly guerrilla patches, and how they did it. And her partner drove me there, which was really cool, to where their patches were, and they were more down, kind of by the river, away from their house. So they would drive there and then hike in. And a cool story she shared with me was one time they went to the patch and it stunk like pneumonia. So they're there and it reeks, right? And they're freaking out. They're like, God, that's a mountain lion. Like, we can smell it. It's everywhere. And she said they were hearing it. And then when they turned around and looked, it was in the tree above them on a madrone.
Oh,
so
wow.
She said they just backed up and got out of there as fast, like in a calm, slow way. But Yeah, that's part of the outdoor life in the hills. So I think there was little runs like that. They expanded through the 90s and 2000s while she was doing her breeding work. And like Francis said, that was the culture. You made your own destiny in ways. If you were an independent producer, you were making your seed, you're starting and growing your flowers, and you're finishing and selling them. And everybody has their crew, has their team. And her team was her partner, and her daughter. They put in the work and really made weed their survival tool. I mean, she told me stories about driving cross country. What they used to do was, when they had packs, they would put them in turkey bags, seal them up as good as they could, and then put them in those Igloo 5-gallon water jugs and drive them across the country. And she said they never had a problem when they got stopped. They were sealed in the jugs, and nobody ever thought to check them. So she told me they would just drive across the country to Florida and make great money, and they were set for the year. They had their chunk of change to get them through the winter. And then in the winter, she had that shed, like it says in her seeds. Her partner told me that over the winter they had their tiny little 2-liter, and she would make seeds for the next season and test the seeds from the last season to check for hermaphrodites and if they liked the flower, and then they move forward with it the following season. So I think
her indoor was basically to make seeds and then to test seeds to see if she thought they were suitable for the upcoming outdoor year. Like, do we like the weed coming off the seed? Do we think it's stable? Is it worth risking and giving the time and space on our patches to this?
That's right. So they took the winter to sort through their phenotypes, and what she told me was she used the winter to find good males. So they were testing the old stuff and then also checking males. So she told me that they mostly stuck with this Afghan male, and that was until like the 2000s. So she was running this Afghan line for her males, and then would hybridize that to the popular cuts of the time. Okay. So she was keeping cutting and breeding. And so that was like in this little greenhouse outdoor shed. It's like a little lean-to shed off the garage. I saw it. It was so cool. And so then 2004, 2006, I think their outdoor patches got cut down. They didn't get arrested or anything, but they found their patches.
They got camped. Yeah.
They got camped on, and so that kind of ran them out of their scene, I believe. And I think what she did was she dug under her house and built a 3-room grow system. And I think she was nursing and vegging in one, and then flowering on alternate times, the other 2 rooms, and then working the shed. I think I kind of have a feeling she slowed down the outdoor thing, but still did a little bit, because her partner told me at the end of her life she was in the hospital kind of checking out and telling her partner, make sure you water. I want those plants to finish, and I want to see it when they're done. And so to the end of her dying day, weed was her passion. Weed was it for her. And I feel that, because when you're up in the hills and you're living this lifestyle, your whole schedule is around weed.
Oh yeah.
You wake up and go to sleep according to your plants. You schedule your whole next year around the crop you're going to grow and the seeds you're planting. It's a lifestyle. It's a religion. It's a culture. It's you go to church in your mom room.
I mean, it's that speaks to me real deep, because I've talked to my wife about how it's like your whole life revolves around like the rhythm of what you do. you know, and it's like a living thing. So it's like having kids or a dog or something. Like they need daily attention and care, or shit's gonna go wrong, right? And so you sort of arrange your life around it. And I would imagine her on her deathbed, she had grown weed for so long, that rhythm of like, did you water? Did you this? Did you that? Like, is so ingrained, right? It's so a part of life, you know, that's what your
Yeah,
mind goes to. And my wife and I have talked about it where like in ways like as the game has changed, I've become a little bit adrift because I used to be so into December and January, I'm taking cuts off my mom's for the upcoming season. And then I'm vegging for my dep. And then I'm transplanting into my dep. And now I'm pulling tarp on my dep. And now I'm preparing for my outdoor. You know what I'm saying? And then I'm preparing for the second dep. And like that rhythm, like you do it long enough, and it's like, it's just part of who you are, you know? So
that's
if it
right.
gets,
It makes a
so I
routine.
could, yeah. So I mean, you know, I could see her at the end of her life, like if you've been in a rhythm that long, you know, like it's just a big part of who you are.
I want to say something about that because we were talking about the type of people that move up to Humboldt County to, like, be in nature, and they're not the type of people that want to be in crowds of people, like they're people that can relate more to the plant than to people. And I just made a new friend from Germany. I won't mention his name, but he was telling me how he has autism and he doesn't like to be around a bunch of people. But plants don't talk back to you,
Yeah, I mean,
That's what I tell my
and
wife. Plants don't talk back.
dude,
we
don't
we
tell your wife that, bro. You're just gonna get
we
in trouble.
we have
Don't,
a running joke. We have a running joke that a lot of really big weed nerds like have a touch of the tism, you know, some more than others. But that is true in the sense that like it's weird in that a lot of the people that went up to the hills in Humboldt or Mendo, it's like you had to be okay with, um, you know, uh, being alone or seeing the same few people every day, or like your rhythm became your whole thing, and like you're not around a bunch of different people. Your job and your life doesn't bring you into contact with tons of different folks, and so you had to be reasonably good at being isolated, or not alone per se, but like happy and content with your family and your small group of friends and your daily chores and life. And now that weed has become a lot more public and a lot more marketing, I feel like a lot of people that were previously like really good growers feel a little adrift, at trying to like navigate the new world. What does that say, Gabby?
It says extreme genetic shed sativa.
Yeah.
And this one says same thing, extreme genetic sativa shed. And then, I mean, there's some here that the names are just like, what the fuck is that? Like Karpov,
Yeah, I mean, if I
like,
didn't know what AOTA meant, there would be no chance. I just happen to know it's all of the above, and I know a little backstory on it. But there's a lot of stuff like that where, I mean, the notes that people write aren't for historians or people that come after them. They're to trigger their own memory. So I'm sure she could have looked at some of those weird labels and it would have triggered exactly what she meant. Extreme sativa in the shed. Oh, I remember that. It grew crazy. It grew up into the lights. It curled around this. It was that Colombian da 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 that I got from so and so. But like, she didn't write a novel, right? She just wrote a little memory jog.
so something that I'm really interested in is this one right here. This one is just labeled Jamaican. And, you know, I've been to Jamaica. There's no, the label is kind of buried in here, but it's on the outside too. But, I went to Jamaica a long time ago, and most of that Jamaican weed is lost. You want to talk about how we lost, you know, the super skunk and other stuff, but like they lost all of their like poor genetics that they used to grow out there. And now like they have fucking gelato and stuff like that in Jamaica. So I'm
They
really
changed
excited
it.
to pop some of these seeds and see, because Jamaican weed had a very unique terp profile. Like you always knew it was Jamaican. And then also, it was some of the most potent weed I've ever smoked. Like you want to talk about herb that was just like knocks you down. That that herb was super potent. Um, anyway, I'm sorry we tend to do this, John, but we distracted you from telling the story. It was completely rude.
Yeah,
Keep going.
weed talk is always interesting. You're not bothering me. So what Francis said really touched me because as an introverted grower, and uh, coming to Humboldt was a relief for me. You know, only being around a handful of people that I saw every day, rather than sitting in traffic for an hour to go 10 miles, was like a massive relief for me. That was a whole like evolution of my being. You know, I felt like I could be myself, and like I, as a kid till into my 20s, I got to travel around the whole country. I was really lucky, and so I saw everywhere, man. I've been to almost every state and driven through it, spent time and talked to people, and I never felt at home like I did, or felt freedom like I did, until I got to Humboldt. And part of it, I think the biggest part of it, was the weed culture, but also like being more rural. I really loved having that space and freedom. It felt like Baja. Um, like when I was younger, we used to go surf in Mexico. I was living in San Diego. We crossed the border, stay in Baja for the weekend, and as soon as you cross the border, it was just like, this huge weight lifted off my shoulders. You know, we were like partying at the time, so surfing was our excuse for going down there. But it felt like a different world, and the only time I felt like that one was when I went up, got into like deeper into Mendo, and then up in the Humboldt. So that really wasn't like what Francis said, wasn't really relative to my life. But anyway, back to East Story, and the information that I gathered was, you know, the life she lived was on the schedule of her plants. And yeah, it is sort of like you said, Gabby, editing her story, wanting to leave this part out. And I think part of the family, you know, power plant, PP is power plant, I found out. I ran that shit way back then, outside back in the day. That was fun. But erasing that part of her story, like you said, is erasing her purpose. You know, in her mind, she was helping a lot of people. We all think that growing quality weed, you know, your weed's going to someone, it's going to help them. It's going to, whatever benefit they're going to gain is going to be good for their life. And I know that she felt that. And that's part of the work you do when you're in this game for such a long time. You know, you're touching people.
And that's why we're going to honor her story even without mentioning her name. And, you know, maybe people that know will know, and maybe her story can still get shared amongst her, you know, people that care about her, you know, so that her legacy lasts.
I think we're doing that justice right now. And if it's just her, it's just her. But I know there's other folks out there that have this same story. And yeah, I mean, I think hearing this, I think hearing us talk about it is just gonna, it resonates. It's gonna bring back good memories for other people that have gone through this too.
I mean, the sad part in a way with some of this stuff is that like there are people, and we've had some on the show, that like are multi-generational weed families. And so like the older people in the family get to pass it down to the younger gens, whether it's like a son or a son-in-law or a daughter, you know, whatever it may be. And then there's families like hers, or maybe like mine in some way, where it's like they almost like their family doesn't feel the same way about it. So even though the person might have been an amazing person and might have used it in all these positive ways, and it might have helped them raise their family and spend a bunch of time around their kids, and they made all these cool things with it, there's people that are sort of embarrassed by the connection, you know? And
right.
that's a shame. That's a shame, because it's like, then it doesn't get, instead of being like, I don't know. It's interesting how like times are changing, but there still is a lot of secrecy.
I mean, I don't know if this is a good analogy or a bad one, but for instance, if someone was gay and that was a huge part of who they are, right? And then her family wasn't happy about it. So when she died, you know, they didn't share that part
Yeah,
of who she was. It's like, no, or he, that's who they were. Like, you don't
right.
have to be
There's
proud. You don't have to be proud of it, but like, you can't change who they were, and it's just,
it also should be said that like there's a giant amount of weed stories just like that. I always talk about all the time how, like, we come out of the shadows or whatever. There are so many people that existed in the shadows, and being anonymous was sort of required. And their friends and their family might know stuff about them. Nigerian nightmare. But yeah, and that kind of thing. And like, there's like and also for weed people, which I imagine is obviously everyone listening, it's like these things are like, most history is oral. And like looking at this kind of stuff is like looking back at, like, it's like a time capsule into weed history. And someone,
Uzbekistan.
yeah, and someone cared enough to do all this and to catalog all of it and to care for all of it.
Hey, something I want to say is, while we're making this podcast to honor her, I also think like we should definitely we have 222 people watching, and I hope every single one of those people will thank John from Nature's Jar and follow him on Instagram, because you know he could have lost it or not handled it responsibly either. Um, and so we all have this because of him. I have this because he thought that I was worthy of having this collection, and I can't tell you how it's touched me that he gave me this, because I know I I value what's here so much. Like I said, I the Chem 91 is such an important plant to me. But when I look at this versus the Chem 91, this is just like, and a lot of this stuff doesn't exist anywhere else, or that we know of. The Chem 91 is out there. So,
The cool thing about seeds is that they're very much like lotto tickets, in that, like, you might not get anything good out of it. It might just be a waste of your time, but you can also dream. And if you're a weed nerd and you see these names, you see Jack Herrera, you see Nigerian or Jamaican, you can dream, like, where did it come from? How did it get to Humboldt? Where did, who was growing it? Like, and like, these are all little bits of weed history. And I think dreaming, is important, you know? Like, every one of
I
these
can tell
things,
you,
like
they were.
lavender.
They told. She told me
Huh?
about a trip that they took to Amsterdam, and so I know they smuggled some of those back to back to Humboldt County,
Do you know what
and
year
that
that
was
was? Or roughly she would have gone?
no. I'll find out. I'll write it in the comments, maybe like tomorrow, or I'll ask. But yeah, they were. She was all in, dude. They went to Amsterdam, got genetics, brought them back, played with them, planted them, flowered them, sold them. She did it all. And when you're living that lifestyle, you're forced to depend on yourself. And I think she was that type of committed, independent female grower. the proof's right there. She worked really hard for a long time.
That's an interesting comment too, because I think a lot of times people in cities, you get specialized and you do one thing. But if you live out in the sticks, you have to get good at lots of different things. One day you might be a plumber, you know?
Yeah.
The next day
you're an electrician the next day, yeah.
Yeah, there's because you know, you also don't want to have very many people come out. What does that thing say, Gabby? Big Bud?
Big Bud. Yeah. And we were just talking about how, she went to Amsterdam and probably came back and made a seed increase. This is one of the packs I was super excited about.
Yeah, so
it's a lifetime of adventures.
It's her life's work. And that's the way that I see it. It's her life's work. And that's what she chose to pour her energy into, something positive that supported her family. And I think that's the backbone of her story, is whether it wants to be recognized or not. She put in her life. She poured her life into all of our passions and made it work.
It's one thing for like it's one thing for like her daughter or her family members to say they don't want to talk about it as part of their story, but this is her story for sure. This says Shiksaberry times Shik or PP. And you said PP was what again?
Power plant.
Power plant. Power plant was huge. Power plant was like one of the huge plants that people, not huge in size, but like popularity. A lot of people were growing power plant back in the day.
But I remember.
The funny thing about looking through seeds, in a way, is it's kind of like looking through your parents' record collection. There's like stuff you recognize. There's like some weird stuff that you're like, what is that? I don't even know what does that sound like? But it's like history.
How about this one, Francis? Huh. This is the one here. Skunk number 1 shed. Skunk number 1, though. There's a couple of packs of skunk number 1 in here.
I mean, skunk number 1 was one of the most popular genetics out there. Most big seed collections have some skunk 1 in there somewhere. So basically, that was what I was curious about, is most of her growing career was what I was talking about, was during the seed culture era. Not so much during the clone era. Is like she grew from seed every year, made seed every year, and grew things out like indoors and stuff to find better stuff that she thought would do well outside from seed.
Right.
So like that's one of the things I think is interesting that maybe people should know, is like, it sounds like she spent her winters doing R&D for the future.
Yeah.
So, spring and summer and fall was like the outdoor season for the patches and making money, but winter was for making seeds and seeing what was in seeds and trying to get ready for the upcoming season and trying to figure out what you had. And I think that's kind of cool, because it meant every winter was an experiment time. Right?
Yeah, that's the fun stuff. Yeah.
Here's one of the best labels. It's just called film canister. And that's got her handwriting in there, and you wrote the same thing on the label, but just film canister with a question mark on it.
Yeah, lotto tickets. What could it be?
As an outdoor grower, a lot of what I learned that I had to do was select genetics for my microclimate.
Yeah.
And the hard lesson of not being able to run some of the indoor stuff I loved outside. And then working the depth too. I love depths because you can run genetics that you can't finish full term outdoor in your depth hoop.
Yeah.
I feel like it's such a good tool and training ground. And even like I'm nobody. I'm just a little grower on the side of the hill, right? Just supporting my family, but I do my own pollinating and seed collecting and germinating of my own stuff because it's it's cool and fun, and it's how I express myself creatively. I'm not an artist. I don't sit down and draw, but my garden and my genetic selection and how I position my plants and the way that I trellis and finish my flower, that all is like my creative energy being expressed through my passion. And that's exactly what she did here. This was obviously something she loved, right?
Yeah,
And
you don't put all that time and you don't save all that stuff. And, I mean, yeah. And a lot of people, that was their breeding plan, was trying to figure out what grew well in their little microclimate, what grew well on their hill and their patches and their spots, you know? And so a lot of people's breeding would like lean into stuff that did well and then sort of just naturally lean away from the stuff that didn't.
You have to. Yeah, you have to make it work at your property. And like I'm in the redwood forest, so we get fog. The fog, I watch it at 10:30 every night. It comes up the creek and fills in the valley, and we're kind of like we're at 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet. So I'm kind of, I get it sometimes, but I definitely have to breed for my climate.
Climate.
It's so critical.
Are sometimes you above the fog, or does it mostly hit you?
We're so I don't need to tell you guys where I live, but in my town is down by the river, and then I'm up on the hill.
Okay.
So the flow from the creek comes into the river, it hits the river, and then turns up the river and flows right up the valley. And if it's bad, like during the growing season, I only get minor fog. It has to be like shitty weather to get fog for more than a day or two. But it comes in at like 10:30, 11, rolls out at like 4:30. So I don't get the day fog, thankfully.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because there's places where like the fog rolls in at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and then doesn't break till 10 or 11 in the morning. And people wake up and they would go out in their plants and their plants would be sitting in a fog bank, And it's not just obviously the lack of, not just like the lack of sun, but it's like the humidity is just so high.
That's where the county wants everybody to move, down by the river. And it's like, do you choose to expand your operation and have a more accessible location, or do you stick to the quality growing in the hills? It's like, well, I don't want to grow less quality dope. I want to grow fire. So I'm not going anywhere. You grow the best on the hill.
Yeah, the hillweed is definitely the elevation.
Well, it's weird that they want you by the river, because
it's where the ag land is, dude. They want it to be an ag product. And the other part,
that's right.
The other part is like, I mean, I don't know, not that we need to get all technical right now, but up in the hills, if you like to get fully permitted, like the fire department wants your country road to be so wide, and they want so many cutouts or turnouts. And like he was talking about before, Fish and Game or whoever else might be like, oh, we want you to redo these culverts. Or like when the water runs down your driveway in winter, it's a class 3 stream and you have to deal with it like this. And so there's so many layers of regulation of what they want you to fix, when for a long time, a lot of people in the hills, they moved to the hills, they started growing, and they didn't invite people out. So there's like a whole generation of stuff that was done in the hills that wasn't permitted, that wasn't maybe done all. Now they want everyone to bring everything like fully up to code. And you've been on a bunch of those roads, Gabby. Like it's not easy to make them 10 feet wide to allow fire trucks to get there and to put in turnouts. So it's easier to get all that done in the valleys. Access is easier. Going over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house isn't the simplest.
I have to ask a question of both of you,
Huh?
Regarding what you just said. Do you think it's reasonable to want those 10-foot wide roads and turnouts? I mean, like, I think that fire protection is important. Like my place got burned out. Now, I think the problem is that people are like, all right, we're about to get our permit. And then at the last minute, they come and they say, oh, we need you to do this. And you're like, fuck, okay. So I do this. And then they come back after you do that and say, all right, now we need you to do this. And so I don't think it's the problem that they want you to have a fire safe road if you're going to be conducting such an operation. I think it's that you don't know in advance exactly what you need to do so that you can get it all done, have it all checked off. They just drag out the process by throwing all that stuff in.
That's fair, but as a small hill farmer, you probably don't have the funds to sometimes spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to upgrade just so you can operate a business.
I didn't ask. That's not what I asked.
But I'm just saying, like,
what I asked is it a reasonable request? You know,
no,
I understand it's not.
no.
Okay.
No. Because the thing about it is it's like, okay, so you can live there for decades. All these people can live on your road for decades. And it can be a fire trap, and we don't require the road to be a certain way for you to live there. But if you want to have a legitimate garden there that's permitted, well, now we need this 3/4 of a mile driveway and access point to be widened, and we need all these culverts fixed. And so I think what they did is they used it as just like a to force you to upgrade the code with all this different stuff. Like when I was doing some legal stuff in Lake County, there was a vineyard we were going to try to grow on, and they were going to make us upgrade all of the pathways and all the roads and all the culverts. But they never made the vineyard do that. The previous business was allowed to rock without doing any of that stuff for decades. And then the cannabis business took over, and they were like, oh, no, no, no.
But is it like that with other things? Like, for instance,
no,
you know, you can have a home. Well, listen, you can have a home that has been built with asbestos. They don't make you tear it down. Okay. But if you build a new home, you have to abide by the new rules. So,
yeah.
I mean, isn't that
the problem is that, and this is what John was saying about his neighborhood, and it goes for my neighborhood and stuff like that too. If you make the costs and the regulations so high, and then what you earn from the business is much lower, you just end up driving an enormous amount of people that wanted to be in business out of it. You know? Like imagine if when you wanted to open the garden spout, Willits was like, okay, yeah, but you have to spend $80,000 revamping the driveway and the access, and we want the curbs fixed up. That's going to be 150 grand, and we want this happening, and when you have to have this kind of signage, and all of a sudden you had to have $300,000-$400,000, not for your stock or whatever, but just to do what the county wanted to open your business.
Okay, well, just to respond to that, they did. It wasn't to the tune of $300,000, but they did come in and say, "Oh yeah, you need to have a cement thing over here to stop someone from driving right into your thing." And like we had to make some modifications, like when we were
Based
building
on
that place. Yeah, and I mean, but not as costly. You know, I mean,
like
if these things are exclusive to cannabis, then it's predatory, and
they are,
and it's you know,
they are.
like
In my area, if you want to put in a vineyard, not that you would right now because the wine industry is in the tank, you could come in with some big ass bulldozers and just push all the vegetation into big piles and then light it on fire in winter. And if you wanted to do that in weed, you're not allowed to cut down these kind of trees. You have to bring in specialists to make sure there's nothing rare or endangered. Oh, that manzanita only blooms 3 weeks a year and we missed it, so we have to schedule it for next April to come check it out. And it would be one thing if other ag had to abide by those rules, but they don't. A vineyard can come in and they can scrape the earth down to dirt and burn everything and then plant a vineyard. You know,
Maybe
and
it's just
so
that the wine lobby is more powerful and has had more of an influence, right?
I think it's more like everybody looked at herb as like this giant cash crop. And I think I think to make John's point about like a bunch of people in Humboldt not wanting it, is that I think there was a bunch of people in power in Humboldt and Mendo that got so used to the money from herb flowing through their community that they didn't think they needed to do anything to cultivate it or give any effort to it because it had always been there, even though they tried to stamp it out. And so when legal happened, they didn't look at it like other counties can steal our lifestyle. They thought they could be as restrictive and as obstinate as they wanted, and it would stay the same. And instead, they drove, I mean, like, you know, it doesn't matter exactly where you live, but I would imagine with the changes, John, up in Humboldt where you are, every business is suffering, right? Like the local grocery stores, the various, you know.
Oh yeah, we're down to like when I first arrived in Humboldt, there was at least like 15 grow shops. I think there's probably like 3 left. They're all just going out of business. Like when you go to Garberville, it's just not the same scene. It was a party 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I mean, you couldn't even park anywhere in town. Now, a lot of my friends have vacated. The town is empty. Businesses are not shutting down. They're shut down. It just feels like the hope has faded, and people are just hanging on. It's tough. It's tough to see from what a thriving situation was here to, red tape getting in the way of people surviving.
So that's what I mean, Gabby, is that they made it so they should have looked at Canna in our area like this is the lifeblood of a lot of these communities, and we need to be as friendly and to permitting and to keeping this here. You know how like when a town gives a bunch of tax breaks and bends over backwards for the factory to not leave because it's the main employer, right? A lot of these places, Southern Humboldt, like Garberville, where he's talking about, has been absolutely hammered. Like that was their lifeblood, and they should have they needed to look at like if some place other than California steals it, this is an existential threat to like our way of life, and they didn't do that. Instead, they made it so expensive to get legal and to stay legal that there's more shuttered licenses now in California than there are active ones.
Oh, hands down. There's so many people less growing right now because of just the red tape it takes to get into it. I'll say my opinion, there's 3 things that crashed the market. It was over licensing of cultivation. It was lack of retail and the local jurisdictions picking and choosing if they were going to have weed or not. Most of them opted out, and no direct access to consumers. I think those 3 things really hammered the industry down. And you're 100% right. The leaders just fully took advantage of the weed situation in our area, and they're disconnected from it. And when I say that, what I mean is they're in Humboldt Bay. They have their own economy built around Eureka and Arcata, and the growers are out in the hills, which is like, an hour away or more. Some people are 4 hours from Eureka in Humboldt County. And so I don't know how much their economy depends, or I don't know if they realize how much their economy depends on cannabis. Because around Eureka and Humboldt Bay, the effect is less. But in the surrounding areas, it's a major impact. And I don't know if they care or not. Our supervisor just got kicked out of our region. So it's just a tough thing, but for me, I'm staying there for the same reasons that I came. It's the lifestyle that I want to raise my kids in. And
I would say Southern Humboldt has a mass exodus.
Oh yeah.
You know,
People have vacated. My friends that were in the legal game, let's say I had 7 to 10 friends doing it. None of them are doing it anymore. Not one. They've either lost their property, rented their property, sold it, or just flat out abandoned their place. People have straight up abandoned legal grows, which is really heartbreaking because it was so expensive to be here. It cost so much. And like you said, Francis, the goalpost just kept moving and moving and moving. What I was told in 2016 that I needed to do compared to 2024 or 2026 now are so different.
yeah.
And they just layer on the requirements.
I think they thought most weed people were rich and that the price was going to stay high and that they'd be able to soak growers for a ton of money to allow them to do it. And when the price collapsed, their cost of doing business was so much higher than the rate of return that it just put people in like an awful situation, you know? And yeah, and so they hollowed out the whole area.
They did. And what's funny is the market crashing has done so much more than enforcement ever could. The joke for me is when I read about law enforcement going after illegal grows. It's like, you guys are just putting on a show. You already crashed the market. People have already left. You know, enforcement to me is really just a big show and a way to fund the local police force, the sheriff's department in Humboldt. They're not doing nothing to the market.
I wanted to say something, but I'll just alter it and say maybe the law enforcement seemed to lose interest after the price crash. You know, take that however you will, but yeah, they and so it's, yeah, I don't know, it's hard. The way legal was supposed to go, obviously, was the first 5 years of legal was all supposed to be small legacy farms, and it wasn't supposed to be anything larger than an acre, and it was supposed to allow a half a decade for all of the legacy farmers in our area and other areas to like get a real foothold in the market. And when they automatically allowed like unlimited licenses to stack right away, they pretty much shafted the entire legacy movement because all those people were much smaller scale than what came later. It looks like we lost John.
John, maybe you need to disconnect and reconnect.
I don't know. Sometimes he was like, before we even jumped on, he was like super clear. And then there's been times where he's looked like pixelated. I don't know. He's gone.
Oh, he's gone. He'll come back though. Yeah.
So
One thing I wanted to say is you're back, buddy.
Yeah, I'm back.
Cool. One thing I wanted to say is I obviously wasn't like trying to defend the way counties have persecuted cannabis farmers. I was just trying to make sure that, we're being a little objective, and like people that don't know would say, well, hey, isn't it reasonable to like want a proper road and things like that, So
I do think, I mean, if you want to look at it like that, I'm not against like bringing things up to code, but like, I don't know, a lot of these hill grows and stuff like that, it's like the roads that were there were logging roads originally. And so it's funny that you allow logging roads to exist a certain way, never make them fix it. And then those logging companies sell the land and they divvy it up into homesteads, and then those all get sold and the road's allowed to stay that way for forever. And then it's allowed to stay that way for forever through 215. And then they're like, oh no, now you need to bring it up to code if you want to grow weed on your property. They basically, like John said, they basically made it to where they wanted to sort of force people out of the hills and bring them into the valleys. And they didn't realize the harm they were doing with that idea. you know, and because there's no, huh?
It would be one thing if they were supplementing this work. Like there's been some grant opportunities. I definitely got some grant money, but for what they put people through, it could have been on a more base, you know, it could have been done more of a, you know, for each location. Instead, what they tried to do was make this framework that everyone had to fit in. And you're on these, in these roads and these hills and in these properties, like Francis is saying, the logging roads are ancient. They're old. A lot of them shouldn't be where they are in the first place, where they fit on the mountain. And so to tell someone, hey, your road that's actually a trail needs to be equipped for a fire truck. It's not even like the money. Yeah, like it's not. Most people don't have the money to do it, but can the hill do it? Like can you fit 20-foot width of road in that section? I don't know. It's something that should be inspected before you mandate someone do it. And that's what it was. That's so many people's stories up here, man. Like getting regulated out of existence.
Yeah. One regulation that really screwed people
one way or another.
was people would build greenhouses or buildings and they would get what's called a Class K permit, which is where you go and get a permit after the fact, right? And loads of people did this because if you were growing, you probably didn't want the county out to your spot. So a lot of times you would just build it and then later on, if you had to, get it permitted. But the problem with Class K was that it was a residential permit. So there was all these people that had all these residential permits and they went to go try to turn their cannabis legal. And they were like, oh, you can't use that building or that greenhouse. It doesn't have a commercial permit. It's residential only. You're not allowed to make money off it. And then they were like, well, what do I do? And they're like, well, you have to rip it down and build one that's commercial. And then that's X amount of money, and then they can't. And so if you stack regulations, not to get all political here again, but there's this thing called regulatory capture, where if you make the regulations layered enough and expensive enough, you can capture the market for a few people that are able to afford it. Because there's very few people that can afford to meet all of the layers of the regulation, right? And so they basically regulated traditional weed out of the hills. You know, it's kind of what they did. And that's where all the weed people, and that's where all the weed people were. That's where all the homesteads were. That's where all the families were. That's where all the old organic beds and holes and different things that people had been developing were. And they were like, come down into this foggy, as he was saying about his area, come down to this foggy riverbank valley area that's way worse for growing weed. And it's got toxins from the previous ag farmers that aren't allowed in cannabis. But you can pay to remediate that if you want to grow there. The farmers that were there before, they don't have to pay for that. They just sprayed it and moved on. But you can't have it in your stuff. And so each individual regulation, Gabby, might sound reasonable in isolation. But when you put it in context and you start stacking all of them, they just made it more expensive to grow than you made money. And so people quit.
And again, this is out of ignorance and also to just, look at the other side. If you wanted to have some other type of commercial operation, not cannabis, and I mean, you mentioned that with if you wanted to put vineyards up, they wouldn't have a problem.
No.
But if you want to do another type of commercial operation, are they going to ask less of you? Now, like for instance, let's say you want to have a factory where you build things.
Yeah, I don't know, because you would never build a factory in some bumfuck hill in Humboldt or Mendo. But like, yeah, like as far as the vineyards go, it's very similar because it's both ag. So why don't we have this? Why didn't we have the same rules that all the vineyard guides have gotten for decades? Why are ours more expensive and different? And it wasn't just like the interesting part when we were going through the board of supervisors is any parcel we grew weed on, we had to bring all of the vineyard roads and all the stuff they had done up to code. within that parcel itself. But they were able to operate for decades and grow, grow grapes there and never had to do any of that. So it's like there's double standards to it. And the problem is that a lot of the best growers were small, independent, people that they can't afford all those expenses and all that overhead. So you weed out more of the legacy people and you allow the people that have big funding and investors and all that different types of stuff to spend a bunch of money, but then the investors aren't going to make their money back either. And then they start screaming about it. So the whole thing is a little bit screwy.
They definitely preyed. They definitely preyed on cannabis. 100% preyed on cannabis. The rules and regulations do not apply for other industries. And if I shut down my weed permit and grew vegetables, all of my requirements would go away. All of them. They would never come for me for growing vegetables, for growing herbs that are not psychedelic. They wouldn't think twice or even look at me. I have to record all my water usage. I have so many requirements. I could spend the whole time talking about it, but I don't want to because it's depressing.
Yeah,
it's the reason I don't get to see a lot of my friends.
About some of your requirements.
yeah. It's driven people out of my life, that I enjoyed being around. It's where we're at right now. It is what it is. Is there a crystal ball? Are we going to be able to see what happens in the future? No. All we can do is learn from the past.
I think it's going to go back to small farming. Honestly,
I think so too.
I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think what's going to drive it back to small farming is that the big farming requires investors willing to lose money, and there's a limit to how much money they're willing to lose. And then getting new investors after hearing all of the other horror stories of all the other investors that have lost their ass. There's a lot of big farms that can't afford their taxes, that can't afford their this, that spent $20-30 million getting going, and there's a lot of pressure on those returns. And so I think it might be headed for like a collapse and then like a rebirth. And it'd be one thing if weed was better on the rec market. I think the best weed came from, just to bring it back to what we were talking about, the best weed came from like little ladies that had this seed collection. Dudes in the hills growing 50 pounds, 100 pounds, 180 pounds, like, not acreage. People that were able to like treat plants a little nicer and do a little nicer care for each one of them. And the scene was smaller. It used to be that, brokers to get weed would come up and they would clear out dozens of different small farms, not go to one mega farm and just look at their list. And those dozens of little small farms, I'm not saying it was like some utopia. There was a wide range of quality within them. But it's easier to get better weed if you're growing less of it, as a general rule. And Humboldt and Mendo had a lot of people had small to medium-sized gardens that grew a lot nicer weed than these bigger farms have been able to manage.
Hey, I wanted to quickly say something. I hope I don't distract us too much, but I wanted to go back to the seeds, because when I posted, I made a post on Reddit saying that, we were going to be doing this podcast and talking about it. And the instant response I get is, oh my God, I want those seeds. How much for those seeds? Will you give me some of those seeds? I have one person, he said, I want 5 of every one of those. And I think he's totally serious too. Like, he's like he's giving me some stuff, but still like 5 of everything. It's like, really? But what I want to tell everybody is that, for starters, these seeds cannot be grown by just anyone, or else John would have kept them. You know, like if they could have been easily planted, he tried to plant them, and I tried to plant them with a minimal amount of effort, um, and they germinated and then died. Um, they require embryo rescue. Maybe not all of them, you know, but the couple that we tried, you know, they peter out. So the good news is that on a lot of these seeds, it appears that there is still a viable embryo inside. Okay, and so we can save them. Um, so, but when people are asking for these seeds, part of the reason why we can't just spread them out is because most people aren't going to be able to grow them, you know? And so if there are people that are experienced with embryo rescue and they want to help with this project, then maybe that's something that we can discuss. Also, the seeds just won't be sold. I've had, it's unbelievable, like the messages that I got about these seeds. I have this one guy like in corporate cannabis. I won't mention his name. I didn't know. He's like, I want to talk to you about the seeds. And I'm like, all right, I want to hear what he has to say. And he's like, I'll give you two offers. The first offer is you'll give me everything and I will pay you a royalty. And I'm just like, and I'm like, and you know, first of all, I'm never gonna entertain this offer, right? But I'm like, and so no money up front? Oh no money up front. If you want, we can do a cash out deal, but it's not gonna be as much as you think it's gonna be. And I'm just like, this guy doesn't understand the value of this book. Like, I could never put a dollar sign value on this. I mean, it would just be ridiculous. You know, like it's just
The
it's
sad thing
offensive.
about seeds is like,
They might not
unlike
germinate.
no, well, just like, but like, unlike music, like, even though you might be younger, you can be like, oh, I heard about Bob Marley and Led Zeppelin and this guy. Like, you can go listen to 70s music, right? If you can go find it, you can go find 60s music, right? You can go listen to that stuff that your parent, but like, seeds, they get old and they get lost, and there was prohibition and there's all this different stuff. So, like, oh, I want to smoke the Colombian or the Jamaican that my uncle talked about, or I want to smoke this, or I want to experience that, or what have you. Like, what's cool about that is that it like ties back to an almost lost part of cannabis history, right? And like, not just by America, but like even like most of the places where the land races came from, they got mixed. You can't go back there and get the same stuff. It was like a snapshot in time. And so the embryo rescue and all that different types of stuff, like, it's a bunch of effort to try to bring it out. And then what's in there? And then what do you do with it? It's almost like weed really needs like an enormous weed nerd to win the lottery, and then just open up like a non-profit nursery R&D facility that they're okay with just breaking even or even losing a little bit of money because they don't need to make any money, and they just want to go through and do cool shit, you know? Because part of the issue, and I'll tie this into these seeds with everything we were just talking about before, with all the regulations and all the costs, is if you're barely making it in a business, that leaves very little room to spend some of the money you don't have on some neat stuff, on some off the wall weed, on some old stuff, because you're barely hanging on as it is, And so, um, that's part of the bummer. And, it's like the whole market is purple candy gas or what have you. And getting weird esoteric stuff back into the market would be tough, because you have to be able to afford, essentially, it's research and development. You have to afford to be able to do it.
You know, there are some. I don't want to say negative comments, but people saying, "Well, kind of good luck." And one thing I'll say, I'll repeat: we have opened them, and found that there are viable embryos in some of them. But the other thing is how many do we have to be successful with to make it worthwhile? There's thousands of seeds here from unbelievable reference of. So even if out of this we get 1 or 2%, we get 1 or 2% of history that's been thought to be lost.
You could even look at it like this. When I
just
buy
want
a
to say,
lotto
like,
ticket,
we won't expect to get 100% success.
when I buy a lotto ticket, I don't really expect to win, but it brightens my mood for 20 or 30 minutes in the car while I think about all the positive effects that would happen if I did win. And that's what looking at seeds is like. It's like it's looking at hopes and dreams. It's
No.
looking at what if. It's like maybe this what would happen if this Colombian da 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 popped and it was the best.
So I like your analogy to a point. The problem with it is the lottery is far harder to win at. Okay, and you can win by breeding just by putting the work into it. Okay, put time and effort into it, and you can win. You know, with the lottery, you can go every week and put your $1 or $5 or whatever it is, and you will never win.
Well, the
So
only point I was trying to make is that looking at the seeds
but the
buoys your
odds are
mood.
far better.
It gives you a better mood. I look at those things and you start to dream and you start to think and you start to wonder and you know.
Well, there's a chance that there could be something really special in there.
Yeah, it could be.
You know, and particularly when you know what the parents are, or like when you look at this and you're like, oh, Jack Herrera, F2, like, you know, I mean, or any of these strains from here, knowing what they're on, like the history. There's some like the Aota, or I found some that was labeled Trinity, Skunk #1, of course.
I mean, even if the fantastic shit and you're like, all I know about this is that it's an extreme sativa from her shed.
Yeah.
You know, the best part about good weed is being able to consume good weed. That's the coolest part about weed. So it's like if all you know about it is it's extreme sativa shed weed, at least it's amazing weed.
We don't always need to know. We normally don't get to know. But it is cool to dream about it.
It is.
So, and talk about it.
One thing that I like about going through weed genetics is the memories that they bring you. And I can remember the weed I was smoking at certain times in my life and situations that weed helped me get through. And I know for sure when people see some of those, the names of some of those varieties, it's sparking and triggering good memories and good times, even hard times, even that might be, you know, memories worth remembering.
You know, this show is called Your Weed Stories. So if you're willing to share one of those times where weed helped you through something, that would be cool. You're the one that said that you had it.
I can remember some times where weed got me in trouble, and I can remember some times that weed really helped me out. Let me think about when weed really helped me. Man, I can remember. So I grew up racing. I've been involved in racing since I was in diapers. And so I remember I drove into a concrete wall and smashed my back up pretty good. Like I was in pain for a while. And man, I've run into everything. I've gone under fences, through hay bales, into concrete walls, into flipped on my head, everything in between. And I was trying to go to the chiropractor and all this stuff and getting massages. And I dove heavy into weed. This is when I was like probably 18 or 19. And the weed it helped me so much getting through that injury. I just kept smoking and smoking and feeling better and better. And as the more I smoked, the less massages and chiropractic things that I needed to do. And it really opened my mind up, because I met this dude who was growing pot, but he kind of like was more on the organic side of things. And this was like a big change for me in my life, transitioning from, you know, just regular everyday stuff onto moving into organics. And besides the weed, just thinking about the change in the natural growth of how things work with organics, it changed my whole lifestyle. Moving, diving into weed, growing weed, moving from salts to organics. It was a mind-opening experience for me. And I would say that weed helped me to mature a lot. You know, it fast-tracked my growth phase in my life.
Did you see our
financially?
Oh, go ahead.
Financially, I never got rich off weed. I know people that did well for themselves, and they pushed harder than I did. But my focus has been on the quality of weed and experience the best smoke that I can get into my lungs, because the effect on my brain from weed smoke is really positive. I can be a little more angry, less patient, unhappy person to be around when I don't have my weed. So I know it's good for me and everyone around me. I need to walk my dog outside though. So I'll let you guys. He's got to go pee.
Yeah, go let him out. Well,
let's go.
Anyway, I just ripped this fucking thing, and then he wasn't.
And then now you're on the spot.
There you go. But I mean, it's funny because he says that herb makes him like not be so angry and stuff. And when I met him, he was such a kind and gentle person. Like, it's hard to see that he would have that side. So
I mean, I think lots of people deal with stress or anger or frustration or you know, and weed, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, mellows that, you know. And yeah, I mean, that's positive. It also is a positive in the sense that I feel like maybe other people have a different opinion, but I feel like weed and coffee are like the two things that you can like do every day if you want and still accomplish everything you want to do. You know, like most other substances could get in the way. But like if I wake up and I drink coffee and then I smoke some weed during the day, like if I need to be a parent, if I need to, you know, if I need to work, if I need to this, I can do whatever I need to do. I'm not a danger to myself or others, you know? And so, you know.
Well, the other thing is just growing the plant. You know, I've asked myself if you had to choose growing versus smoking. You know, like I just love growing the plant. You know,
I mean,
and
I look at it like
I love growing plants in general. You know, so
you always have. I feel like most of my life is just caring for things, like caring for the plants, caring for the kids, the wife, the dog, whatever. You know, like you've got like a rhythm of things you have to accomplish. And I think purpose and I think dudes especially, like I think some people get like a benefit off taking care of you know, taking care of things. And so I think plants give you a rhythm to life. It's a living creature. You know, if you want it to be happy, you have to treat it well. You know, hopefully you don't do anything dumb and hurt it. You know, and so I think, I don't know, I just think that like I think, and it's rhythm too, and I think people do well off rhythm. You know, like most people's rhythms are forced on them, but you know, that's what's funny. Like when you see like weed influencers, And it's like you can only be so many places and grow weed. Like weed requires you kind of to be there every day for the most
Yeah,
part.
for sure.
You know, so that makes like travel and all that kind of stuff. You have to bring other people in. You have to hope nothing bad happens while you're gone. You know, and you know, so it's just, yeah, it's like a daily meditation or something. What time is it, Gabby?
Working on it. Yeah, I actually have to get going too soon. It's noon. John's
Noon.
walking back, so I think we'll just
He
wrap it up.
is.
Anyway, I we were both saying that we need to get going. It's been about 2.5 hours, and we've had like almost 300 people watching us at one point, I believe, and
Nice.
I think we did a good job of honoring the story of the female weed warrior, as is the way we're um, calling her in respect for her family's wishes. And we are going to pop these seeds. And, like also, once the seeds are germinated, once we save them, giving that stuff up is going to be way easier. You know, we just want to make sure that like we don't give them to people and then they're lost just because we're passing it on.
Especially
So
if they're a pain in the ass to germinate and require special care and special gear or tech or this or that to
right.
coax them to.
If it
Hopefully we get lucky, and not all of them are like that, and some of them will pop even though it's a low percentage.
The thing is that we're gonna just do it to them no matter what,
Right.
because by the time you figure it out, it's kind of late. You know what I mean? Like I
Hmm.
thought the ones that we popped, I was like, these are going to make it. Like they look like they were gonna make it, but then they didn't grow from the cotyledon. It turned green. It turned green.
Oh wow.
Okay, so
So it
it
cracked
turned.
the shell and popped up and through
Well,
the
no, it
first.
didn't crack the shell. I did a C-section.
Oh
in
right, right, right.
like I
Okay.
use like dental tools after soaking. I use dental tools to peel it open, and inside the embryo is not dried up and shriveled up. Okay, it still looks healthy. Okay, it has like and I've posted pictures of it. I can look for it if we start
No,
from
I
there.
mean,
But the embryo looked healthy, and so that's what we need, to put them into tissue culture. And like I said, it did turn green, but then it just didn't go.
it just stopped.
So yeah. So
That that
um,
was the biggest reason I passed this book to you, Gabby, was because I didn't want to lose the genetics from popping them. And that's what I was afraid of, trying to make it work and then it not working and losing these saved genetics. You know, I
well,
didn't
I
think I
am
could do it. What I'm have going on in my life right now.
well, like I said, I'm so grateful that you gave it to me. It was pretty much the coolest gift anyone's ever given to me, as far as like, and trusting me with it. It's like, wow, I must not suck when people are giving me this. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, you can tell yourself that. You
like,
don't suck, Gabby.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, my lady all the time, she's telling me, Gabby, you suck. And I'm like, but babe, look, somebody
It's the
gave me
proof.
this. If I
Really.
sucked, would I have this? You know? But she's like, whatever, bro. Just take out the trash like you told me you would do. you or whatever. So
Well, on that note, dude, I do
you
have
have to take
chores
out the
I have to
trash.
get to. I do. Not the trash specifically, but I won't bore you with what they are.
Um,
But
Alrighty. Well,
it's always good to chat. And it was very good to meet you, dude, John, because this is
Yeah.
John's and I's first conversation for sure. So this was good. I enjoyed it. It was a
Likewise,
nice
guys.
chat.
Thanks for having me. I've never
okay.
uh I've never done anything like this, so it was pretty fun.
Well, we'll do it again. Hey, one thing I have to tell you is you can't hang up. We're gonna stop the video, but you can't hang up. You have to make sure that it's fully uploaded before you shut your browser. So, Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Peace.
Bye now.